Thank you very much, Noah. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this year's Tech Forum. I realize that I've already been called out from the stage once today for an intemperate remark that I made on Twitter this morning, because I keep forgetting that everybody here has PDAs and a laptop and things like that, and you're sending and receiving in real time. So I'm going to be very careful about what I say up here, and I promise to try to only drop a maximum of 3 F-bombs in the next 40 minutes. So hold me to that. This panel is on the in-house digital shift involving the notion that we have come to the conclusion that ebooks are here to stay, that digital is here to stay. Where do we go from here in terms of staffing considerations in-house? How is that going to change the makeup of jobs in-house, the idea of what people do in-house, and so on and so forth? The panel consists of, to my immediate right, Jamie Broadhurst, who is the Vice President of Marketing for Raincoast Books and an instructor at the Publishing Department at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, where he teaches a course on book marketing. He was educated at Trinity College at the University of Toronto, has worked as a bookstore manager, and served as former national president for Word on the Street. During Jamie's tenure at Raincoast has won the CBA Marketing Achievement of the Year once and been shortlisted twice for the same award. To my far right, we have Rob Firing, who is currently Director of Publicity and Communications at HarperCollins Canada. Rob has been a marketing and public relations professional for 20 years, has successfully created publicity campaigns for books, entertainment products, and media, publicity tours for global celebrities like Jamie Oliver and J.K. Rowling, and in 2006, Rob's campaign for scientist Tim Flannery's The Weathermakers won the Canadian Marketing Association Gold Award for Best Marketing Campaign in the publishing category, and the Merit Award for Best Overall Campaign under $1 million. The rose between two thorns is Sarah McLaughlin, who is the president and publisher of the House of Nancy Press. And that's what I was given.
You don't need to know anymore.
That's the way you write a bio, people. So I just wanted to get started by taking the measure of where we are now and then extrapolating from there to talk about where we're going and how the shift in requirements as we move into a more digital environment is going to impact Canadian houses. The impetus for this panel was a blog post that Sam Francis posted on the BookNet blog about a Forrester publishing executive survey that was done in the fall of 2010. And this survey, Forrester surveyed 35 executives from 27 U.S. publishers, which represented approximately 65% of U.S. revenue. And the survey found that, number one, 89% of the people surveyed think that the transition to digital will have a net positive effect for the end user. And the other thing that interested me was the people were asked when they thought 50% of sales were going to be accounted for by digital as opposed to traditional books. And the median answer, if I'm getting this right, the median answer was 2014. So by 2014, they are projecting that 50% of sales will be accounted for by digital. Do we feel the same is true in Canada? Do we have that same kind of optimism about digital here?
Am I first? You be first.
You want me to be first?
Yes, you be first.
Damn. I don't know the answer, and I think anybody sitting up here would be foolish to think they did know the answer. I mean, we saw the Bowker data, and that seemed to be only willing to give us information for a month. So, you know, where we're going to be in 2014, maybe in business is what I'm still hoping for. You know, I think if I can sort of flip the conversation on its head, the whole concept around, you know, the digitization of publishing is a bit of a longer conversation. I mean, at Anansi, we've been trying to make a kind of digital shift for about 7 years. You know, it started by, you know, making our website consumer friendly so that you could, you know, come on and purchase, yes, a physical book, but through digital channels, a book from us. And then we all started to understand that with a publishing house that's over 40 years and a children's publishing house that's over 35 years old, we have all this backlist that exists as film and in plants that you know, we had to wrangle books into data because that's how we were going to have to feed the system. So we were going to have to make things that weren't digital. And so we embarked 2 years ago, Rose, on a whole archive digitization. And it would seem to me that the natural outcome of doing these kinds of things is ultimately being able to deliver your content, because now that's really what we're talking about, in all kinds of different ways, digitally. And so you know, I think that, yeah, the horse is out of the barn, the devices are in people's hands, and people want to read things digitally. And if we are the content providers, and we've got lots of great, rich, beautiful content to give people, then it is incumbent upon us as publishers to figure out how to deliver that content and still stay in business. What the percentage is going to be between an ebook market and a p-book market, I couldn't even begin to say, but I know that we have to be there, and that's sort of the basis on which we run our company.
You've asked the hardest question first, you understand that?
Then it gets easier from here. So.
Oh, good.
You want to go?
Is that, I thought you were going to give us an answer, sorry.
Oh, no, yeah, no, that wasn't a prelude to an answer, really. But, I mean, I'll be able to speak about what happens to, you know, a company like HarperCollins when they go about trying to market and promote their books through publicity efforts. And that's changing. I mean, it's become sort of a bigger and smaller in a strange way. And one of the ways I think about it is, I mean, it's remarkable what's still around, what hasn't changed, is interesting, and I think just as telling to the future of marketing and PR in books and entertainment products in general, I think, than what has changed. Everyone's talking.
Can you give us
about.
an example of what hasn't changed?
Well, I think that media brands are, I mean, of course, I mean, it's just, it would be silly to say anything else, but media brands are still very much alive. And of course, whether that's on paper or on a computer screen or on a handheld device, is different, but they really hold sway. So people feel differently about what they're reading, if it's in the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star or the National Post, you know, or another branded website. So it's still, and you know, newspaper readership is actually high in Toronto. It's something like 80%. So it's important to continue to pay attention to those people, and no one doesn't. And you know, they're trying like hell to figure out what's going to happen to their businesses too. So here's an interesting example. I'll try not to ramble too long, but I mean, if you ask yourself, or any publicist, for example, the following question: what would you rather, if you could only have one? Would you rather have your author profiled on the Globe and Mail's website, or would you rather have them profiled, you know, in the review section or the focus section of the Globe and Mail, in print only? And they'd always choose I mean, it doesn't happen that way, but they'd always choose the print. So it's still, you know, the biggest workhorse in terms of getting PR is exposing your content through those media filters.
Perhaps that's a good lead into to the guts of what this panel is about, which is the
Do you mind if I take a step?
Oh, no, of course. No.
I realize I should be smart and duck this question because, as Rob was saying, this is the toughest. I think you were citing Forrester. If you were to look at, say, something from Forrester, say in the year 2000, their prediction was by 2004 it would be 13% or 14%, astronomical growth. We've just been in a panel with our colleagues from Bowker who said in the US it's about 13%, for argument's sakes. And I think it's fair to say the consensus in the room would be that we've seen extraordinary growth. And so much like many technological innovations, I won't use the word revolution, we know things are going to happen. The trouble is we never know when that's going to happen. And so it's kind of like this innovation or revolution came 10 years later than we anticipated. So are we going to hit 50%? I don't think anyone, as Sarah says, no one wants to hazard a guess, but I'd imagine most people in this room want to plan their business with the assumption that that's within the realm of possible. And so what does that mean?
Right.
So, and I would agree absolutely with what Rob is saying, even despite this change, digital for publishers means more than just e-readers. Digital is how we produce books, how we market and publicize books, and I think as an industry, we can actually be quite proud about how, in fact, John Thompson for book Merchants of Culture, that's been called out a couple times today, has a great chapter that puts this into context. We as a group, as an industry, have been really quite forward-thinking about bringing digital into all sorts of aspects, whether the reader is reading the Globe and Mail in print and then going into their local bookstore or into a Costco to purchase the book or going online. And I would say that one of the things that I found interesting about this morning, because we're focusing so much on the e-reader, that's quite a precise type of reader. 50% of book purchases in Canada are unplanned in any given year. That's pretty well the same data from about 20 years ago. And when we're talking about an e-reader, that's a highly attentive, highly media savvy, very instant gratification type of reader. But that's not the entire market. And so one thing that I would want to stress is through this focus, we need to be thinking in terms of segments. And the segment that I think is really, really critical is the casual, light book buyer, that consumer who actually really does fuel blockbuster titles and makes our year either a good year or a really great year or not a good year. And they tend not to be discussed in these type of forums. So I would just put that out there as well.
So where do you go to find those readers now, and how do you attract them? Do you use the same tried and true techniques that we've always used in publicity in terms of pitching to review editors at newspapers and magazines and so on, or do you approach people online? Do you approach individual readers to build word of mouth, or do you do both?
Well, I think you've hit it with word of mouth, which is, I'm afraid, Kevin Williams is in the panel, and he always taught me, and it's so true, that the tricks in marketing, although we give them different names, those tricks tend not to change. And so word of mouth is such an essential element of how you make a book. The damn complicated thing about it, word of mouth is so entirely difficult to predict, so difficult to see how far it's going to go, and so very difficult and scary when it's going to end. And so as a result, as someone else has said, the great thing about publishing is we reinvent our business almost every year. We have new books coming out every year. We have this a new marketing campaign. Rankos will have 1,000 titles this season. In fact, we have 1,000 distinct product launches a season. So we do develop those techniques.
The funny thing about word of mouth, a much bandied term, is it's not as if it didn't happen before the internet. I mean, people had telephones and things like that, and voices. They wrote letters. But I mean, what is different is how quickly you can, and to what extent you can measure it.
Yeah.
Even before it starts to show up in sales, and that's where sort of the extra publicity effort comes into the picture. Is you can start to follow those rivers and pinpoint real influencers. I mean, it may take you a really long time, and it can, but it can be a very rewarding component of a PR campaign. Is to the three pillars are really to engage with the public, and you can use the author to do that, and create intense media attention if you can, in as short a cluster as you can, and also to leverage the book's grassroots community if it has one. And you do all those things at the same time, and all three of those are made easier by sort of new techniques that publicists are using. One simple one, which is really obvious, is you can find everybody. And another one, which isn't as obvious, is you can find pretty much anybody, because those interests are all rolled out right in front of you somewhere. You just got to look. So it doesn't mean necessarily that you can get a quieter book, the coverage you think it deserves right away, but you'll get it some. And of course, as with anything, stuff with its own momentum that comes from its own profile works better and faster than something that doesn't.
Sarah, anything to add?
No.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that both Rob, you and Jamie were emphasizing what has stayed the same in the fact that you're using the same techniques to access readers, whether it's online or whether it's offline. Another interesting fact from the Forrester survey, and I would hasten to add that it's difficult to apply the American situation to the Canadian market because we're so different. We don't have the same mass market that they have in the States. However, I'm about to do it, so forgive me. They said in the Forrester survey, one of the things that the guy who conducted the survey said was, we had under half, but not too far under half of our respondents say they expect general staff, and this is in-house staff, to go down this year, not to mention over the next couple of years. However, they felt pretty confident that the digital staff would rise. So at least in America, the experience seems to be that there are going to be layoffs. Staffing is going to shrinking. Now, I don't know how this is possible in Canada because we're already dealing with skeleton staffs in many cases, but people with specifically digital skill sets are going to be required over the next 5 or 6 years. Are we in Canada preparing for a shift like that?
Well, I mean, I can speak to, I think a few publicity departments at a few publishing houses by saying that the same people in branded media anyway, it's the same. It's not like, the Toronto Star is going to fire all their staff writers and hire digital staff writers. I mean, they're the same folks. It's the same ideas. You really, this is an industry of ideas. I mean, it gets sort of esoteric, and I mean, I have to go and chop wood sometimes just to feel gravity, because you really, you're taking somebody else's ideas and you're giving them to someone else so someone can read about them later on, even before they've bought the intellectual property. Really, you're dealing with I mean, if it's a market, if you call it a media market, you're dealing with the same kind of thing. I mean, it's in front of people's faces differently. And again, you can measure it better and faster, but you're really dealing with the same customers.
But in terms of the in-house makeup, here's an example. I work at Quill Enquirer, I'm the review editor there. And I get pitched by publicists on a daily basis as to review this book, this is an author you should look at, and so on and so forth. I also maintain a blog called That Shakespearean Rag, which is unpaid, it's online, and I get pitched by publicists there. You should review this book, you should interview this guy, do you want to host this blog tour? But the interesting thing is, they're different people pitching.
Really?
So you have in many cases, you have two people doing what amounts to the same job. How sustainable is that?
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah.
In our house, we do have a person who's dedicated to web marketing. She's right over there. Her name's Trish Osett. She's really great. And we originated that job actually with Julie, who's over there, because we really felt that we needed somebody to be, drilling deep into then the World Wide Web, and then Facebook, and then Twitter, and then, all kinds of different social networking communities that are out there. And we needed somebody to manage our website, which was sort of the portal into which people would come to Anansi. And we kept a traditional publicity group. We still keep that division, if you will, but we managed the sales, marketing, publicity team as a big whole. So it's a very holistic organization. And Trish works with Laura Repass and Kate McQuaid in publicity in sharing ideas and dividing tasks and who's going to go after what and who's going to cultivate, which people in which media areas. There's certainly, from my point of view, enough work for everybody to do that. So a little bit contrary to what Rob might be saying, is that, at the Globe, there's Peter Scowen, who's in charge of communities and online, and then there's Rob's dad and Martin Levin on the book side, and we deal with them separately. They don't cross over, and we don't particularly cross over with them. That said, when we're coming up with a campaign or how to get a book out there and how to get word of mouth going, we work on it all together and then divide up the tasks. So, and I was interested today, I was trying to send off a book to somebody in the States for consideration for rights, and I was at home, so I didn't have access to all my mainframe at work, so I went on to Google to find out about this book that I was pitching to see if I could include some reviews. And what was really interesting to me in terms of how this book was trending on Google was, and who was talking about it, was that the bloggers all came at the top. So it was all the bloggers who had done their reviews that were at the top, and it wasn't until I got to page 3 that I found the Star, the Globe, and the Post. So to me, that was a very interesting indication about the power of that kind of new, if you will, review community, and the importance of cultivating both of them, and they are quite different.
Yeah. And I'll take just a quick stab at this, if you don't mind, as
No,
well.
at all, Jamie.
Sarah always teases me for being too polite, but I think one thing that has changed, because I do think word of mouth is central to everything we're talking about, and we're trying to basically monetize the creation of word of mouth, which God knows if we come up with the answer here, we should patent it. But what I will say has really changed is, because of all the technologies we've been talking about, I truly believe that marketing, more than anything, is an early warning system, that in terms of the chronology of how we build a book, the timeline, we would look at initial orders out of Amazon in Canada and the US, but in both markets compare that in a weekly meeting with sales, marketing, and inventory together. Months before a book comes out, we would track the Google traffic as well. We would pull in as much information as we can. And the reason we do that before the book actually hits the street date is because feedback from our customers is that the selling cycle has changed for front list. Instead of one selling cycle for front list, it's 3 cycles now. They get sold the book traditionally 3 months prior or 4 months prior. Hopefully more than often than not, they're using our fancy new e-catalog system that blends both print catalog and digital. But then they want to know a month before, the month that something is releasing. Tell us anything that has been confirmed. Tell us how the book is building in other markets, because then they're going to review where they're with the book. And then what they want to know is 4 weeks to 6 weeks after, how are we tracking against other markets? And I'm not talking about large format, very large retailers in Canada who, of course, think in these terms. I'm talking about single store independents as well. And that's a real shift. And so, again, this concept of word of mouth, which we like to think is always in control of publishers, quite often we're not in control. So I can think of our best-selling cookbook last year. Our initial order for that laydown order was 200 units. We ended up with a very healthy, I won't quote the exact number, but 6-figure number, which was early warning symbols because it was generated from blogs. Interest online magazines, 70% of the reviews we get are actually online from online magazines as opposed to in print now. And then really good supply chain marketing, i.e. getting books to market, resupplying very, 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 very quickly. And I think those type of tactics, which again, don't seem particularly glamorous, are actually how the industry is going to weather the changes going forward as well as we can.
I find it interesting that, Jamie, both you and Sarah were highlighting the importance of blogs, and the blogosphere seems to be a place where if there is any way that you can not necessarily monetize word of mouth, but at least harness it, that's the place to do it, because it's a very close-knit community. They all talk to each other, and I have seen books take off because one blogger has reviewed it positively, got it into the hands of another blogger, and it becomes a chain reaction. So given that, as managers who are looking to hire the next generation of publishers, what kind of skill set are you going to be looking for? And perhaps, Jamie, you could talk as an educator at SFU as to whether or not the schools are tailoring their courses to ensure that, for example, you have courses in how to manipulate social media, how to code XML, how to do this, how to do that.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I will say, not just because I'm standing on a stage organized by BookNet. BookNet's done a very good job doing outreach to all the different publishing programs across the country. So when we hired an intern who we've just brought on full-time, and to that point, she actually was helping us load Onyx feed from our client publishers, she at least knew what Onyx was, which is, and she understood the context of what Onyx was, and understood, although it's on some respects is incredibly mind-numbing, trying to the finicky nature of Onyx, understood that flowed not only into our e-catalog system, but online to us and then onto our e-tailers, recognized the importance of that. And so, kudos to BookNet for going out there, and kudos to some of the publishing programs for at least the first step of education on that. What I would say it's allowed us to do, thinking about the kind of digital revolution, we, as John might have mentioned earlier, we used to have a department of 6 people who would create what we would lovingly call the phone book, a 300-page print catalog of all our different distribution client publishers. We closed that department a number of years ago, went to print catalogs from all of our client publishers, and lo and behold, we've actually reinvented a new catalog now, a digital catalog, but without hiring and staffing up in terms of extra people. As our marketing manager says, our e-catalog is powered by the power of interns, which is slightly, on some days it feels like it, but on other days what that means is the person who has been responsible for collecting Onyx, the person who's been responsible for putting information on our website is part of our e-catalog system. And also, frankly, our publicists who are getting the hits and actually loading those media hits into our e-catalog system are feeding the central database. And I guess that's our biggest insight so far is, and it's so easier to do than actually achieve, whenever possible, if you can have a central database, it just makes your life so much easier.
To that point, we are in a full-on sort of educational swing through our company, getting everybody conversant with our new data management system and how everybody in every division has to interact with this system. We've changed the name of our print production department to the cross-media. Thank you. Even I lose it sometimes. I'm an old person and I have a fountain pen up here. The cross-media department. And that is a department that is headed by somebody who is responsible for effectively creating the EPUBs and understanding where the book is always going to be in the production process, and that may be an end result, which is a P-book, or it may be an end result, which is an e-book. So the whole thinking of the organization has had to shift into this sort of digital realm, and we're right now looking for somebody to actually fill a digital role within the company, because it's just so much work. I mean, creating a P-book is one thing, and then when you go around to make an e-book, that requires a whole other kind of editorial process. We do them all in-house, and we do all of the copy editing in-house, and it's labor-intensive. So we've had to sort of rejig all the ways in which we think about how we move our data around and who has to engage with that and how they have to engage with that.
At HarperCollins, we have a few people who specialize in digital marketing, and some who are just dedicated to the task. And where it cross-sections with publicity is in social media. And so we have social media specialists there that work with them, B2B, and also just in general in terms of how to strategize best approaches to spreading the word. And they're in constant contact with all of the publicists on a daily basis. They meet weekly. It changes quickly. New techniques emerge, we've all had, I think at the very beginning we enthusiastically or fearfully thought that, well, we have to do everything now. We have to throw advertising dollars onto Facebook, because if you don't, you're just not doing the right thing. But there are just, it's become more and more sophisticated as time goes on. But the publicist's job, perhaps not surprisingly, remains largely the same. Their job is to, expose your author and your book in a positive light to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, with the hope that, that translates into ultimately word of mouth, which we don't carry on, we only start, and we can only accelerate. So the qualifications of someone who can do that, that's someone with poise, that's someone who's literate, that's someone who can knows how to make a case, someone who's versatile, and someone who's ultimately well-networked.
But is it also not somebody who understands, for example, how to use Twitter?
Oh, of course.
How to use Facebook?
Yeah.
How to get word out to the blogosphere and so on. And these things don't seem to be things that everybody's equally good at, and they don't seem to be things that traditional publicists have focused on.
I guess not, but it's not like publicists are naturally going to be bad at it. These are skills that have become very basic. A lot of people know how to do this now, the job is to just leverage what you already have in terms of your network and your ability to make a case for something and get behind something with the new ways of doing it.
After you, please.
Oh, you sure?
I absolutely insist.
In our organization, we sort of spread it across the organization. So I even Twitter and Facebook and do those kinds of things. So I don't see that particularly as an exclusive task, because I think actually the thing about social media and the thing about being in that space, as Mitch Joel was saying this morning, was that, what was he saying this morning? Was that really each of you have your discrete communities that you're talking to, and so the more within your organization you are taking advantage of your social media contacts, the better it's going to be for the thing that you're making. So it's not, to me, an exclusive publicist's job to do that. If in our organization we have 5, 10, 15 people who are on Twitter, who are on Facebook, I would hope, and I think it often happens, that we talk about the things that we do and we put them up there and we put them out into the community. And that's kind of true social networking as opposed to, manipulated by brand social networking.
Yeah, and if a publicist is very active in that way, what can happen is they can, not that it's a practice run, but they can certainly learn where to go next, right? When it does come to approaching big branded media or bigger and better bloggers, they can actually sort of get a real shape of how that campaign should be handled.
I'll just add one thing to this, because they haven't been mentioned yet in the equation, which is the sales rep. Our colleagues at Random House famously say that the role of the sales rep is actually changing as much from sales into marketing. The distinctions are blurring, that the sales rep is as much about prepping the account who's actually seen the catalog because they've gone online, they know the content, talking more about business review and how we're actually going to push titles. And I think that would be applauded by a lot of booksellers if that was the case. I can think of an example with one of our reps who has, again, been using the same techniques for the last 30 years in her career, very, very accomplished, and using those same techniques because they work. And so, hence, being highly, rightly so, quite skeptical of new technologies. 2 conferences ago, we started Twittering our sales conferences, had great outreach to media and to even some authors who contributed in real time to the conference. That particular rep actually found that strange, that the promotional cycle actually was now beginning at conference because things were becoming more intense. At last conference, that rep went using our e-catalog system, emailed a PDF of the book under discussion to the key customer in her market who needed to know about that book right away, and got an answer back in real time during sales conference. And that happened, that transition in her mind happened in less than 4 months. So,
Right.
and I think the key is making sure the technology is specific to a context that's going to make the job of a rep and or a buyer or a store better. And if you can come up with technology and empower your people to use it, then again, we're going to be able to weather the transition in the industry better.
I wonder, because I'm turning 40 this year and I don't know what the fuck Onyx is. That's one. I wonder whether it's old folks like me who are going to be left behind in terms of this, because I don't see a lot of professional development available for in-house workers. Is that the case, or am I wrong about that?
I'm 50. I know what Onyx is. Not maybe much more than what you know, but I do know. I think that it's incumbent upon an organization, if you see change happening, to educate the people in your organization. So, I think that's happening. Is it happening, you guys?
It's totally happening.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So I think that is happening. It can't not happen. I mean, if you don't do it, you're not going to sell any books because you won't be able to get your data out. You won't be able to do anything. So you've got to do it. So I think there's plenty. I mean, in my organization, we're doing it.
So instead of what Forrester was suggesting last year or last fall, in the sense of more digital jobs becoming available and the people who don't do that being laid off, you're interested in retraining the staff that you have to work in the digital environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's, you've got institutional memory. When you've trained people in an organization, they've been with you for 3, 5, 10 years. That institutional memory plays a huge role in how you're going to, feed your stuff out into the world and how you're going to talk about it. You don't throw that out.
No.
That's good stuff.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say that, one of the dirty secrets about social media, and the point was made time and time again this morning, it's about meaningful conversation with real readers. That's incredibly time consuming. And the point was made just before we started a panel, the only way you can really do that is have lots of friendly groups. I won't say stakeholders outside of the organization. I will not say that.
You just said stakeholders.
Friendly groups, and also making sure that that everyone who feels they can be charged with engaging in conversation on behalf of the company can do that, which is fraught, obviously. You don't have one official spokesperson saying, as a former spokesperson for Harry Potter in Canada, I realize the benefit of having official spokespeople, but you can't possibly build books that way any longer. You need to have as many people in the company talking about books. And again, that's nothing new. This is an industry, went through a paperback revolution in the 60s and 70s, went through large format revolutions in the 90s. We're going through change right now. I mean, we're a pretty resilient group, and I think we figured out a lot of it so far.
so far we've been talking basically about the changing rules in publicity, but I'm interested to hear what the panel thinks about changing rules in distribution of books and how the traditional notion of distribution is going to change, whether the jobs in the warehouse, for example, are going to be affected if there are 50% fewer physical books to warehouse. Now, I know, Jamie, that Raincoast has just opened a new warehouse that has an expanded ability to store books, which seems counterintuitive to me in our environment.
Yeah, it does. And I'll talk about that. We just opened a new, I feel like a meat lover at a vegetarian conference or something. Yeah, because as John said, we are in the business of distributing physical books. We like to think we do it extremely well, and for the reasons I described about the supply chain, how critical it is to get those books right to market, right at the right moment. So we do have the advantage of focusing on print, and it keeps our attention focused like a laser on print. So we would say that, again, the market will determine the ultimate size for print books, but we do think that the role for a highly efficient book distributor, there's going to be a very, very healthy role in Canada for a long, long time. There are significant book retailers in Canada, large and small, who actually are seeing growth. We saw growth last year. We see growth in categories like travel, where the debate is, or the discussion is, that everybody is getting travel information off of their iPhone. Well, lo and behold, we actually sold more print copies of travel books last year than we did the year before. We're selling them more efficiently. We're using digital media to do that. So I guess the key for us is to make sure, however the market shifts, that for us, the thing we focus on is how big and healthy is Raincoast within that shifting market.
To this point, I don't mean to cut you off abruptly, but I've been told we have about 5 minutes left, and I've been asked to leave 5 minutes for questions. So I wanted to open the floor in case there are any questions for our panel. And if not, we can just continue on.
Cameron.
First question you asked was the 50% by 2014.
2014, but that's in the States.
Now, well, maybe it's worth asking the room what they think.
What do you think, Cameron? You work for Kobo.
I think it's very reasonable. I wondered what the industry thinks. So do I.
So does David Kent. Kevin?
Well, you know, the book business is not a big, uniform creature. It's a fragmented creature of billions of different countries all over. So it really depends on what kind of books you publish. And I would suggest that poetry may well not move to 50% digital. I'm not going to sell my books at the poetry reading. So in drama, which is our other big area, I would suggest it's the same. Because when you're putting on a play, you probably want to have a script. So as we move forward, it becomes more and more evident it's all about what niche and what group and what people you're publishing the books for. So you have to really contextualize your statements to say that, you know, yeah, sure, I believe that 50% of book sales may be digital by 2014. I just don't think that 50% of everyone's book sales.
I think the other issue that's sort of the elephant in the room is what's going to happen with the big box retailers, and how is that market, if it shrinks, going to affect the P-book market, given the size of the particular retailer we're thinking about.
Yeah.
I just have a comment. I'm an author, but I've worked in digital communications for more than 10 years. And I always find it interesting when you talk about communications with publicists, how they're still siloed. And it was good to hear you say that you thought, Sarah, this is everybody's business to get on social media, which I agree with. But I also think the role of the traditional publicist is dwindling. Like when you talk about web, when you talk about digital and mobile and social media, everybody has to do it.
I don't think it's dwindling. I think it morphs, right?
It's morphing,
It has to
yeah.
morph.
But it's sorry, I didn't. But I always find it interesting how when we're discussing it, we silo the two, and I think it is unnecessary to silo. I think it's not replace one with the other, but it's like it's a certain percentage of somebody's position has to be web, has to be social media, and it has to be kind of throughout. Just really more of a comment.
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody here would disagree. It is morphing into exactly that. Everyone does a little bit of everything. I mean, we're just sort of at the beginning of this future in books. I mean, this is something that hit music and is, of course, hitting newspapers in a very big way. But weird things happen. I mean, you look at New York Times, for example.
Yeah.
They have 10 times as many eyes on their website. Same content as they do on their printed newspapers, but they make 10 times as much money in advertising from their printed newspapers as they do from online advertising. So, and I think that it's just going to be strange for a while. We're the sort of the last, media to be digitized in a serious way, and we're going to just discover things that we didn't know were out there, and that includes people's jobs changing and their job descriptions changing. The basic skill sets, I still insist, are very much the same, and there's huge crossover. So a lot of it simply doesn't matter that you're changing from someone who's deciding whether to put something in print or not, or on a radio station or not, to someone who's deciding to put something, on their website or not. I mean, the job of convincing somebody to do something, convincing somebody else that they're the devil and that person's an angel, is basically the same.
And if I can just add, to pick up just what Rob said, and maybe this is controversial at a new technology conference to say this, but I'm going to speak up for the broadcast model that,
CBC.
I will say either CBC or Canada AM can really sell books. It's a broad audience. I have no idea that the individual person who's watching Canada AM the morning that we had the author of a particular book on last week. I won't plug my own book.
Oh, come on.
I
go.
will not.
Go.
Or,
Social networking.
if we have if we get editorial content in the Costco connection, that is the job of a traditional publicist. They do it very well, as Rob is saying, and it continues to move the needle in terms of sales. And so, and I guess that goes back to my original point about thinking about the light buyer, the accidental consumer. They can be in Costco. They can be watching Canada AM. Print circulation numbers for newspapers continue to be actually very high, although advertising has plummeted since the recession. We would be crazy not to want to work with the Globe and Mail or the Vancouver Sun in either digital or print. We see net benefit.
Jamie, you have very politely had the last word because I've been told that we've run out of time. So thank you very much, guys.